So as long as I can remember, I've always felt like there was an elephant in the room, and I deeply desired to have a connection with people beyond just the social niceties and the social norms that I was taught. And as I matured and grew, um, tried to play by the rules more and more all my life. And I wanted something real, and I wanted something deeper, and I wanted to have the difficult conversations, and I wanted to just I realized that what I wanted was making people uncomfortable. And so I sort of sold that desire for caring what other people thought, and trying to sort of like be this image of a person and not make people too uncomfortable. And I had these like back and forths in my life, especially in like my teenage years, where I would be more extroverted and try to have relationships, deep relationships with people. And I would eventually get hurt. And so it was like I would go right into my shell, and I would become this withdrawn and really focus on my own life, and like trying to become the person who would show them was part of the motivation of like working on my own stuff and doing everything. But at the same time, it gave me the sense of relief that like I had no one else judging me. It was so much easier to be me, or to be an authentic person, or to think much less of myself, which was the uncomfortable thing. Because being around people, when we've learned these social norms, causes us to think of ourselves more and more and in more and more ways. And so this is a habit that I've been trying to break, and realizing that it's not a habit that I can actually try to break, but that there needs to be a deeper awareness of what's driving this habit. Because the same thing that is trying to break it is also driving the habit, the separate sense of self. And so we know the elephant in the room is light, the light of consciousness, ourself. And so non-duality really helps us to resolve this sort of back and forth of desiring a deeper connection, and desiring other people to understand this, and other people to really be able to know us and communicate with us. And going off by ourselves and realizing that other people cannot understand us, and the need to be understood is thought, not realizing that this is already fully understood beyond knowing. And so that's where we get kind of stuck, which leads me into the next synchronicity of everything that's happened this week. So lately, just like I feel susceptible, and hopefully this is something, again, this is something I'm aware of, because again, we can't try to change it, right? I'm very susceptible to seasonal changes, and this time of year is usually a time where in the past I kind of like go deeply into things and can go deeply into depression. And so I've been contemplating a lot about birth, and how a lot of our stuckness starts with the idea that we were born and that we are a person. And so when we were born, we were announced with a name and a gender, and then people, they believed that they could know what we were. And so then we tried to fit that image, because we want to be the people who people know what they are, because that keeps them comfortable in themselves. And when you get into this all unravels, and you realize that you were never born. And so like a few days ago, I forget when exactly it was, on my Facebook feed, this picture showed up, and it was this cave that was celebrating like the feminine anatomy. And I looked at it and I was like, huh, that's kind of beautiful. And I was like open-minded about it. And they had like certain rituals in the sunlight and something. And then a day or two later, there was this discussion about death, and someone posted a video about a guy who got stuck in a cave, and unfortunately, they were unable to rescue him. And this news story gripped me in a way of like imagination that has not happened to me in a really long time. And I kind of thought I was beyond being susceptible to this. So in the past, there's been certain news stories that just hit me in such a way that I can't get them out of my head, and they deeply affect me. And so this did that, although I was able to use awareness with it at the same time. And again, when we're so deeply drawn to something or so deeply emotionally affected by something, there's something there for us, but at the same time, we realize that the awareness is not, it's not trying to disidentify or identify at the same time. And so the synchronicity of this cave story was just kind of crazy, because I realized that I've always had this intense fear of being stuck in a cave. And there was this idea for a novel I had, and one of the scenes I knew would happen and imagined, and a dream that I kept having. So this kind of got put into my idea for the novel, and was a dream I kept having was of like going through a tunnel deep underground. So I've always been fascinated with the ideas of tunnels and caves, and yet really scared by them. And when I was a kid, we went exploring some cave somewhere with my family. And we went in this cave, and my whole family was there. And there were a lot of other people there as well. It was busy. And all of a sudden, I got separated from them. And I got off on some section that I wasn't supposed to be on. And all of a sudden, there was no one there. Like, I think they may have like shut the entrance to the cave at that time. I'm not sure. But all I knew was that there was no one there. And the direction that I felt I was supposed to go was just like this running water, underground running water in the cave. And it got darker, and I couldn't find the way back. And all I could hear voices outside the cave, but I had just assumed that was other people talking. And so eventually I just, by process of elimination, found my way back and found my way out. And when I got out of the cave, I realized that the voice was a tour guide the whole time that I wasn't listening to, because I didn't think he was speaking to me, that could have been helping me to find my way out. And so, being deeply affected by the story, I realized that was something in my psyche that wanted to be dealt with. And another synchronicity is the story that upset me so much. One of the cave passages he went into before he went to some unexplored area and got stuck was called the birth canal. And so, like, putting this together with our idea of us being born and that being the ultimate stuckness in a body, I contemplated that a lot. So then, it's funny how these things all work together. Then somebody in the conversation I was having later talked about Jesus's words and saying that the way is narrow. And so I went back and I read the passage, and I think it's Matthew 7. And he starts out with saying, "Judge not, lest you be judged." And so that's a beautiful, profound thing to say, but we realize that our judging of other people is us judging ourselves. Like, this goes deeper and deeper with non-duality. And not to, and then it goes right into the verse of take the log out of your eye so you can see clearly to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye. And it says the way is narrow. And so how I interpret this is that we're always projecting outwards onto other people and what they're thinking of us, or projecting the fault onto somebody else, when the way is narrow. And it's like we're stuck, and like going into that stuckness, going into ourselves and our own thoughts, and realizing that when we're thinking of other people, we're always really thinking of it's a thought, or it's our own thought, it's our own projection. And at first, we can have a ton of resistance to it. It feels like isolation, it feels like being stuck. but really it's the ultimate freedom. And I had another insight. I was just reading this book, and the author was telling about this kind of eccentric thing she did. And so I'm imagining her doing this, and at the same time, I'm thinking it's kind of eccentric and silly, but at the same time, I have this profound love for her and appreciation for her. And I realized in that moment, like, how complicated my emotions are, or my love for other people is, that I will have these judgments about people. But at the same time, having like a higher perspective of the author's love, the author who writes her villains or writes these kind of characters that are caricatures of themselves and loves their flaws and everything, how by thinking about or trying to control what other people think of me, or having that fear, I'm trying to steal their own creative imagination experience away from them. And when we try to protect people from disturbing things, or protect them from something that brings to light something they don't see about themselves, we're actually like stealing this kind of experience from God away from, really, I say them, but it really always goes back to ourselves. And we have no objective character when we always go back into ourselves. This is awareness itself, and yet all of these things kind of play out in this beautiful creation. And so going forward, my idea of creation is to allow and just allow, and then these two dualities are merged. I remember reading Anne of Green Gables when I was a kid, and there was a section in it that I remember really well. And she started like going through the forest and started letting her imagination roam. And eventually it got to the point where she just got terrified of the woods. She just convinced herself that was this terrifying place. And she's like kind of had this war with her imagination, where she's like, I'm not gonna imagine anymore. And later she kind of comes to the understanding that imagination is a beautiful, wonderful thing, and she doesn't want to let go of it. But at the same time, she kind of has to rein it in. And so that's what we're doing, is we have to rein in our imagination. And when we feel, paying attention to how we feel, and getting away from that love that is what's projecting all of this at its heart, then we can have real peace. And one thing that I started doing in this past week when I started having kind of a hard time is I had this red marble that I found at the river. Like, it's an antique marble I think someone lost years ago. And the day I found it was kind of like a special day, and it had meaning to me. I got lost in my daughter's room, and I was cleaning her room, and I found it, and I kind of put it in my pocket. And so when I went on a run through the woods, I put the marble in my hand, and I decided to use it as a meditation. And like, it takes on the heat of your hand. And so I sort of like projected like awareness and kept going back to the awareness of it, because I was just in this place where none of my thoughts at that time felt good. And it was just, it's this beautiful kind of thing that shows you like the marble, the entire run, like my thoughts would go to places that didn't feel good. But during the entire time, like, the marble was in my hand. The sensation of the marble in my hand that I kept trying to go back to was already there, whether I was conscious of it or not. And so this kind of gets into this subtle distinction where we say that we should be aware of it, but at the same time, it's already there. And that's where we kind of, when we go into imagination, we can try to cut it off, but really it's a power that we need to learn to use in an aligned way.